This story ends with life and death, with a man who thought he was untouchable, a woman who finally chose herself, and the moment everything he built came crashing down. My name is Marion Walker, and at 55 years old, living in Dallas, Texas, I truly believed most of my life's major chapters were already written. I thought the pages ahead of me were supposed to be quiet ones, peaceful, predictable, familiar. 30 years of marriage, 2 grown children who had flown the nest and built lives of their own, a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood with manicured lawns and nosy neighbors. A routine that had become as known to me as my own heartbeat. Morning coffee on the patio, checking in on our kids' group chat, planning dinners, keeping the house running while Richard kept the money flowing. On paper, it was a success story. The kind people at church pointed at and said, "Now that's a solid marriage." But somewhere along the way, the quiet stopped feeling comforting and started feeling suffocating. Not peace, not stability. It felt like being slowly erased. Richard and I met in college. I was 22, studying English, thinking I'd become a teacher. He was the ambitious computer science major who swore he'd be a millionaire by 30. Back then, he was charming in a way that felt larger than life. He'd show up outside my dorm at midnight with fast food and flowers, telling me he couldn't focus on code if he didn't see my face. He was theatrical, dramatic, obsessed with success, but somehow made me feel like I was the center of his world. He proposed under an oak tree on campus with a plastic ring because, as he said, the real one is coming once I close my first big deal. I said yes because I believed in him, because I believed in us. When we had our kids, first our daughter, then our son, he was the fun parent and I was the responsible one. He'd swing them around in the living room until they screamed with laughter, then hand them back to me when they cried. And even then, he still tried. Flowers every Friday without fail, breakfast in bed on my birthdays, handwritten notes tucked into my coat pockets telling me I was beautiful, even when I'd barely slept with 2 toddlers crying at night. But somewhere between raising our children, him building his IT company from scratch, and him treating real estate like a competitive sport, something changed. Or maybe he changed. The company grew. The money grew. The houses multiplied. The cars got nicer. The watches got shinier. The restaurants more exclusive. And Richard, he stopped looking at me. I don't mean metaphorically. I mean he would look past me, through me. Like I was a permanent fixture in the background of his life, a painting he'd grown used to and no longer bothered to admire. I tried to pull him back. I booked date nights at his favorite steakhouse. I wore heels that made my feet ache, dresses that hugged my body in ways I hoped he'd notice. I changed my hair, learned new recipes, read books about keeping the spark alive in long-term marriages. But Richard was always busy. Busy with the business, busy with important meetings, busy with networking dinners, busy with his phone. Always his phone. Screen lighting up with messages I pretended not to see. Women who've been married as long as I have develop a sixth sense. We can read silence, glances, absences, like weather forecasts. And I could feel it, the distance, the indifference, the way his hand on my back felt like an obligation, not a desire. When a man only touches you out of habit, not out of want, you feel it, and it cuts deeper than any argument. But I didn't want to lose the family we built. I didn't want to be the woman who couldn't keep her marriage together. I didn't want to look my children in the eyes and admit their father didn't want me anymore. So I swallowed the discomfort, the doubt, The humiliation of watching my husband brush off my attempts at intimacy like I was offering him a sample at a grocery store. Then, one evening, after the kids had come over for Sunday dinner and left, and the house was full of that bittersweet quiet that comes after family gatherings, Richard poured himself a glass of whiskey. He sat across from me at the dining table, swirling the ice in his glass, watching it melt. There was a tension in the air, that feeling you get when you just know someone is about to say something you can't unhear. Uncertain? He said slowly. Have you ever wondered if this is it? I frowned. What do you mean? This life, this routine, same house, same people, same everything. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's kind of what marriage is, Richard. Consistency, stability. He gave a half smile, the kind that never reached his eyes anymore. Sure, stability. But people change. Needs change. We're not 25 anymore. Neither are the women you text at 2 in the morning. I snapped before I could stop myself. His jaw tightened. You going through my phone now? No, I said. I'm going through my instincts, and they're screaming. He sighed, took another sip, then said the line that changed everything. Maybe we need space, some freedom. We're older now, Marianne. Things change. Men have needs, and you deserve to feel wanted, too. I stared at him. Isn't it funny how men have needs always becomes a philosophical statement right before they do something selfish? He didn't like that. His eyes hardened. So what, Marianne? We just stay stuck like this? You unhappy, me unfulfilled, we keep pretending? You want that? I fired back. No, Richard, I want my husband to look at me like he used to, instead of acting like I'm the housekeeper he happens to sleep next to. We went back and forth. He framed it like a solution, like he was being enlightened, progressive, honest. An open marriage could help us, he insisted. No lies. No sneaking, just honesty. If I want to see someone, I tell you. If you want to see someone, you tell me. No guilt. I stared at him. Have you already started seeing someone? He paused just a second too long. Not seriously, which meant yes. The old me, the younger, hopeful me, would have stormed out. Packed a bag, drawn a line in the sand, and refused to cross it. But 30 years is a long time to fuse lives, finances, families, a long time to convince yourself that leaving is worse than staying miserable. We didn't agree that night. I told him it felt wrong. I told him I didn't want to share my husband with anyone. I told him I was scared this was just a way for him to cheat with my signature at the bottom. He hugged me, stroked my hair, and whispered, I don't want to lose you. I just want more. Freedom. We can set rules. We can do it our way. Weeks went by filled with half fights and cold silences. He kept bringing it up. I kept saying no. He'd guilt-trip me, then apologize, buy me jewelry, take me out, then circle back to it. Until one night, after another tense conversation about how we're both clearly unhappy, I looked at our wedding photo on the wall. The young man who'd sworn I was his whole world, the young woman who believed him. And I realized something heartbreaking. I already was in a one-sided marriage. One where he did what he wanted, emotionally and physically, and I just didn't have the paperwork to prove it. Shaken. Hesitantly. Uneasily. And, yes, stupidly. We set rules. We wouldn't bring anyone to our home. We would always use protection. We would be honest if we started having feelings. He nodded like a man closing a business deal. Pained. He swore he just wanted to explore. Casually. But casual turned into weekly. Weekly turned into routine. And routine turned into pure humiliation. The women he dated, they were always younger. On their second or third career. Yoga instructors, marketing managers, influencers, divorcees finding themselves. Always lively. Always impressed by his success. He would take them to restaurants he never took me to. I knew because I saw the charges. He'd take business trips that suspiciously lined up with long weekends. I'd smell their perfume on his shirts when I collected the dry cleaning. He started coming home later. Started asking me not to wait up. And when he kissed me goodnight, when he remembered to, it felt like he was signing a receipt. Transactional. Obligatory, empty. And I accepted it because I was terrified of losing him, or maybe terrified of admitting I'd already lost him years ago. But in my effort to keep him, I was losing myself, my sense of worth, my sense of womanhood, my sense of being alive. And then, someone unexpected stepped into my life. His name was Cristobal, 44, Mexican, warm-eyed, gentle-voiced, the kind of man who spoke softly but carried a quiet strength. His presence felt like standing in sunlight after living under fluorescent bulbs for decades. He worked for Richard's company, one of his most reliable project managers, the kind who arrived early, stayed late, fixed disasters before anyone noticed, and never demanded credit. He was in the U.S. on a work sponsorship visa, something Richard enjoyed reminding him of. Not directly, never directly, but with little digs. Careful with that client, Cristobal. You don't want immigration looking too closely at anything, huh? Little power plays, the kind that said, I own your stability. I met him properly at a company gala, the kind with overpriced wine, executives pretending to be visionaries, and wives in sequined dresses silently comparing jewelry and waistlines. Richard spent most of the night glued to the executives and his investors. At one point, he introduced me to a group of men, then walked away mid-sentence because someone more important arrived. I stood there, holding an empty glass, feeling like a prop someone forgot to put back in the storage room. Cristobal noticed. He walked over, took the glass gently from my hand, and said, "You look like you need a refill and an exit strategy." I laughed, a real laugh. You have no idea. He brought me champagne, but more importantly, he brought me conversation, real conversation. He asked about my life, not just as Richard's wife, but as Marianne, what I liked to do, what I did before kids, what I used to dream about. I realized, halfway through telling him about how I once wanted to open a small bookshop, that no one had asked me about my dreams in years. He listened. He genuinely listened. Eyes focused, phone away. He laughed at my sarcasm, teased me back lightly. There was no agenda, no ego, no performance. And I felt seen for the first time in years. Our connection grew slowly. We'd run into each other when I stopped by the office to drop off lunch, something Richard barely acknowledged anymore. Cristobal would say, "You didn't have to do that, but I'm glad you did," with a smile that lingered a second too long. Richard noticed too, but in a different way. "Marianne loves playing house," he'd joke in front of his staff. "She needs to feel useful now that the kids are gone." I'd force a smile while Cristobal's eyes flashed with quiet anger on my behalf. Richard started inviting him to our barbecues. "He's a good worker. Gotta keep him happy if we want to keep billing those hours," he'd say. At those barbecues, I watched Cristobal help set up, help clean, toss a ball around with our visiting grandchildren, thank me for every little thing. The contrast between him and my own husband, who sat in a lounge chair barking orders and bragging about his portfolio, became impossible to ignore. Somewhere in the gentle spaces between those interactions, I fell, and so did he. Not in a reckless, explosive way, but in a slow, careful, respectful way. Two lonely souls rediscovering what it feels like to be noticed, to be valued, to be cherished. Our affair wasn't wild, it wasn't chaotic, it was tender, healing, a refuge. We met in small ways. Coffee after I happened to be near his office, longer talks after company events. Eventually, there were stolen evenings where we shared more than just conversation. He made me feel beautiful, wanted, chosen, not because of my husband, not because of my last name or my money, but because of who I was when no one else was watching. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just Richard's wife, I was Marion. But nothing stays hidden forever, especially not from a man like Richard, a man who needed control like oxygen. Richard didn't find out because I confessed. He didn't find out accidentally. He found out because he'd never really stopped watching. He checked the old CCTV system, the one he said he never looked at anymore, the one he insisted was just there for insurance purposes. He saw us together, not naked, not in bed, just sharing a soft, intimate kiss on the couch one evening when he claimed he was working late. A quiet moment, a hand on my cheek, a smile, a happiness that had nothing to do with him. I didn't know he'd seen it. He didn't confront me, didn't shout, didn't rage, didn't even change his tone at home. If anything, he got nicer. Suddenly, he was bringing home flowers again, suggesting dinners, asking how my day was, and like a fool starving for emotional breadcrumbs, I let myself believe he was finally waking up. He wasn't waking up. He was lining up his revenge. Cristobal's visa had quietly expired months earlier because Richard forgot to renew the sponsorship paperwork he was legally obligated to maintain. Rather than help him fix it, rather than give him the same grace he gave his cheating, tax-dodging buddies, my husband picked up the phone and called ICE. Deep hurt. Cristobal was stopped on his way home one evening. A routine traffic stop, they called it. His documents didn't match their records. He was detained, processed, deported within weeks. No goodbye, no explanation, no closure. I found out from one of his coworkers, a frantic call telling me, "They took him. He's gone. I'm sorry, Mrs. Walker. I thought you should know." I hit the kitchen floor, the phone still in my hand. Richard found me an hour later, eyes swollen, mascara streaked. "What happened? What's wrong?" I choked out fragments. "Immigration! Cristobal! He's been deported by ICE!" He pulled me into his arms, held me, whispered, "I'm so sorry, honey. That's awful." And shamefully, I believed him. In the months that followed, I tried. God, did I try. I tried to be the wife he wanted, tried to convince myself losing Cristobal was a punishment for stepping outside my marriage, even though the rules of that marriage had already been shattered by him. We went to dinners. He spent most of them on his phone. We tried pottery classes. He quit after one session. We tried couples therapy. He charmed the therapist, turned every session into a monologue about how he felt unappreciated and how I had emotionally checked out after the kids left. He painted himself as a man desperate to save his marriage, and me as the cold, distant wife who didn't know what she wanted. I watched, quietly as he performed, as he lied, as he twisted reality. And I realized something. I wasn't trying to fix our marriage anymore. I was trying to fix my perception of him, to reconcile the man I married with the man standing in front of me. They weren't the same person. And then came the crack, the final one, the one no amount of gaslighting or manipulation could plaster over. Tense, one quiet afternoon, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find a beautiful Latina woman, maybe mid-30s, holding a baby no more than a few months old. A baby with Richard's eyes. Shocked, her hands were trembling as she asked, "Is your husband home? He hasn't been helping with the baby. He bought us a house and then disappeared. I just need him to take responsibility." Her name was Elena. Her voice was shaking. Her eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted in a way I recognized. She wasn't confident. She wasn't seductive. She wasn't trying to replace me. She was desperate. I could have screamed, slammed the door, called her names. Instead, something inside me went very, very calm. I stepped aside. "Come in," I said. "You look like you need to sit down." Over coffee, with her baby dozing in a carrier, Elena told me everything. Richard had pursued her. He met her at a tech conference. She was working in marketing for a small startup, bright-eyed and hopeful. He'd charmed her with stories of his success, his modern marriage, his loneliness. He told her I knew, that I was fine with it, that we were both grown-ups who didn't believe in old-fashioned rules. He promised her stability, promised her he'd help her career, promised her he wanted to spend more time with someone who understood his world. When she got pregnant, he told her it was a blessing. He took her to see the little house in Arlington he'd bought for their future. And then, when reality hit, he disappeared, stopped answering calls, stopped sending money, blocked her number, left her alone with a newborn and a house in his name that she couldn't maintain alone. She wasn't my enemy. She was a younger, more vulnerable version of me, someone he had carefully selected, groomed, and discarded the moment it became inconvenient. I looked her in the eyes and said, "You and I were not enemies. He is." She burst into tears, apologized, said she had no idea I hadn't agreed to any of this, that she thought I was some cold, wealthy wife who didn't care what he did. I laughed, a soft, bitter sound. That's his favorite story. I held her while she cried, felt a bond forming between us I never expected to feel with the other woman, because in this story, she wasn't the villain, he was. After that day, something in me shifted from heartbreak to calculation. Together, Elena and I started connecting the dots. Richard's lies, his finances, his business trips, the shell companies, the offshore accounts, the undeclared properties, the way money would disappear in the books and reappear in lifestyle upgrades. Elena had something I didn't: screenshots, voice notes, late-night confessions. He had bragged to her, actually bragged, about how he outsmarted the IRS, how he sheltered assets so I'd never see a dime if I ever got crazy enough to leave. He'd told her about how he was untouchable, and even problematic business associates were dealt with swiftly. He bragged about how he dealt with the problem by making a call. At the time, she thought he was venting about work drama. Now she realizes she was dealing with a narcissistic sociopath all along. He thought she was too naive to understand the implications. He underestimated her, and he definitely underestimated me. I hired a divorce lawyer, a shark in a tailored suit with a reputation for dismantling men who thought they were invincible. I brought everything, every file, every message, every screenshot Elena forwarded me. We spent hours going through it all. At one point, the lawyer sat back, steepled her fingers, and looked at me with a slow, satisfied smile. Mrs. Walker, you can take him for almost everything. Controlled fury. We leveraged my forgotten 10% share ownership in his company, a tax move he made years ago and never thought about again. We leveraged his fraudulent expenses and secret accounts. We leveraged the evidence of his abandoned child. We leveraged Elena's testimony. We leveraged the other women we quietly tracked down, women who were more than happy to sign statements about how he funded their trips with company money. We leveraged every single lie he'd casually told, thinking it would never come back to him. Faced with the possibility of a full-blown IRS investigation, public scandal, and criminal charges, Richard folded faster than I thought possible. He settled. I became the majority owner of the company he built. He was forced out, not in a blaze of glory, but in a whisper of disgrace. The property portfolio? 70% went to me. The liquid assets? 60%. Elena? She kept the house in Arlington and received guaranteed, court-ordered child support, a non-negotiable condition I demanded. The judge called Richard's behavior calculated, deceptive, and cruel. He called mine measured. For the first time in years, I felt something close to justice. Even so, there was a wound that still hadn't been addressed. Cristobal. I knew he'd been deported. I still didn't know the full truth of how it happened. Then, one afternoon, a former employee of Richard's, a man who'd heard rumors about the divorce, asked to meet with me. He looked nervous, guilty, and then he told me what he'd heard. Quiet devastation. Richard had bragged in a private meeting about taking out the trash and getting rid of a liability by calling ICE on Cristobal after seeing us together on the security footage. He'd let his visa lapse on purpose, held that sword over his head, then used it. The pain that hit me in that moment was sharp, but beneath it, something else formed. Purpose. I needed someone who understood the business, that could help me run it, and so I put 2 and 2 together and contacted immigration attorneys. Real ones, ethical ones, not the kind who used people as leverage. We dug into options. It wasn't easy. It wasn't guaranteed. But Cristobal was skilled, respected, and had a company now willing to sponsor him at an executive level, my company. We filed everything we could, pleaded his case. Backed it with references, records, proof that he'd been exploited. Months later, the approval came through, and then, one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, my office door opened. Cristobal walked in. Older, tired, eyes carrying the weight of exile and return. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he smiled that same gentle smile and said, "You changed your hair." I laughed through the tears rushing to my eyes. "You disappeared," he apologized. I apologized. We talked for hours about what happened, about Richard, about fear, about starting over. We didn't rush into anything romantic. We were older, wiser. I hired him as a senior manager, reporting directly to me. We worked together, side by side, slowly rebuilding trust. And somewhere in the quiet, everyday moments, sharing coffee, solving problems, laughing at bad jokes, we chose each other, not as an escape, not as an affair, but as a partnership, grown, intentional, real. Richard, meanwhile, spiraled. He lost his company, lost his wealth, lost his connections, lost his mistresses once the money dried up, lost his home, lost the respect of his children, who eventually saw the full picture. He left Texas, moved somewhere cheaper, cut off most contact, too proud to admit defeat, too ashamed to face what he'd done. A year passed, maybe a little more. Then, one morning, my phone rang. It was a mutual acquaintance. Hesitant, voice low. Marianne, I don't know how to tell you this, but Richard passed away. They're saying it looked self-inflicted. No one's really sure. I didn't feel triumph or satisfaction, just an ending. The final chapter of a man who refused over and over to look at himself honestly until there was nothing left to see. I didn't attend his service. Our kids did. They grieved the father they remembered from childhood, not the stranger he became. Elena sent flowers on behalf of the baby he tried to pretend didn't exist. Christabel held my hand and told me, gently, that this was not my burden to carry, that the choices Richard made were his own, that the end of his story was not the end of mine. And for the first time, I believed that. Today, I run the company Richard once used as a weapon, but I run it differently, fairly, transparently. I make sure no one's visa, livelihood, or dignity is ever used as leverage. Christabel stands beside me, not beneath anyone. Elena has a stable home, an education plan, and a career path we've helped her build in our HR department. Her child, Richard's youngest, grows up knowing love, not shame. We rebuilt our lives from the rubble of Richard's ego. And for the first time in decades, I feel alive. Saving a marriage doesn't mean saving yourself. Sometimes, letting something end is the only way you can begin again. So if you've stayed in something that slowly destroyed you, out of fear, guilt, habit, or the stories people tell about what a good spouse should tolerate, hear this. Your story isn't over. You're allowed to choose yourself. You're allowed to walk away from what hurts. You're allowed to rebuild something better from the ruins of what almost broke you. Because I did. And if I had to choose again, I would still choose me. My name is Marianne, and this was the last straw. If you enjoyed this story, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe.